There's a moment, quiet and invisible, that's always comes before the war. Before the boots hit the ground. Before the first news alert flashes across your screen. Before the flags are raised, the troops are cheered, and the politicians cry, "Freedom!" from behind their podiums. It happens in silence, in corporate boardrooms, in hush calls between lobbyists and lawmakers, in backdoor meetings where contracts are signed, padded with billions of your tax dollars. Because war in America isn't spontaneous. It isn't accidental. And it for sure isn't novel by default. War is a business plan. It's a sales pitch wrapped in a flag. It's a job creator, if you're lucky enough to be a defense contractor. Behind every invasion, there's a check being signed. Behind every bomb, a logo. Behind every death, a dividend. In this episode, this isn't about who dies in war. Not yet. It's about who profits from it. Because for all the talk of patriotism and sacrifice, the truth is more sinister. Some people don't want peace, not because they hate our so-called enemies, but because peace doesn't pay. And war pays out big time. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, the names change, but the game doesn't. Their stocks rises with every escalation. And while families bury their sons and daughters, CEOs cash bonuses. So why are we doing this episode? Because someone has to say it. Because while our schools crumble, while families ration insulin or medicine, while veterans sleep in tents, the war machine keeps humming, funded by us, fueled by lies, and protected by silence. It's time to follow the money. So welcome to episode 2 of the American War Machine. This is Blood for Profit.
For centuries, wars have been fought by soldiers in national uniforms. But today, there are new players on the battleground. Private military companies have played an increasing role in global conflicts. For the soldier with no flag, modern warfare is a lucrative trade. But some of these companies have committed atrocities and other human rights abuses. The 2007 Nisour Square massacre shone a light on the actions of these shadowy groups.
17 people died here in September 2007 when contractors from US security firm Blackwater unleashed a bloodbath.
A 9-year-old boy was one of the 17 victims shot dead by Blackwater officers, a PMC that had won over $1 billion worth of US contracts over the course of the war in Iraq. Today, PMCs are used across the globe and business is booming. Russia uses them in the Middle East and Africa. China is using them to protect its Belt and Road Initiative project. And even radical Islamists have entered the PMC game, with companies like Malhama Tactical offering training to jihadi groups, as seen in this Channel 4 documentary.
Let's start with a number. $886 billion. That was the US military budget in 2023, the largest defense budget in the world and the highest in American history. Now get this, that number is more than the military budget of the next 10 countries combined. China, Russia, India, the UK, Saudi Arabia, Germany, France, South Korea, Japan. All of them together don't spend what we do. And yet we're constantly told the same thing, that America is unprepared, that we need more weapons, more tech, more bases. But here's what they don't say out loud. Most of that money doesn't actually go to soldiers. It doesn't go to the mental health services. It doesn't go to the VA hospitals or military families living in poverty. Hell, it barely goes to actual defense. It goes to private corporations, to weapons manufacturers, logistics, contractors, and tech companies who depend on conflict to turn a profit. So you guys have heard the names: Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics. These companies are just military contractors. They are, in many ways, the de facto architects of American foreign policy. So in 2022, just these 5 companies took in $118 billion in Pentagon contracts. And they didn't get those contracts just by being good at their jobs. They got them by lobbying. From 2001 to 2021, the defense industry spent over $2.5 billion lobbying to Congress, more than any other industry except healthcare. They write legislations, they fund campaigns, they sponsor think tanks, and most critically, they embed themselves inside the government. Let's take some examples. Mark Esper, Trump's Secretary of Defense, was a top lobbyist for Raytheon. Patrick Shanahan, his predecessors, worked for Boeing for 3 decades. Then we have Lloyd Austin, Biden's Secretary of Defense, sat on Raytheon's board of directors before joining the cabinet. And that's not the swamp. That's the military-industrial complex that President Dwight Eisenhower warned us about back in 1961. And it's no longer a warning, it's policy. So let's focus on Raytheon Technologies. Raytheon produces some of the most profitable and widely used systems in modern war, like Javelins, Tomahawks, Stingers, the Patriot missile system. They're not just selling to the United States, they're selling to the world. But here's the ugly part. They don't even pretend to be neutral. In a 2021 earnings call, Raytheon CEO Greg Hayes said this, and I quote, "We are seeing, I would say, opportunities for international sales, particularly as tensions in the Middle East continue." Opportunities. That's how they talk when war is the product. And the proof? When the war in Ukraine began in 2022, Raytheon and Lockheed stocks surged, outperforming the broader market by double-digit margins. So at the end, conflict equals cash. And by the way, you know who makes the Javelin missiles who were sent to Ukraine? Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. And those missiles, they're paid for by you, the taxpayer. Now, let's zoom out and talk Lockheed Martin, the biggest defense contractor in the world. Their crown jewel, the F-35 Lightning II fighter jet, a plane so over budget and underperforming that it's practically satire. Over $1.7 trillion has been spent on this program since it began. And despite all that, it still suffers from over 800 documented software issues, unreliable systems, and a maintenance cost of $38,000 per flight hour. To put that in perspective, the average US teacher earns less in a year than it costs to fly this jet for 90 minutes. And yet, Congress keeps funding it. Why? Because Lockheed employs over 100,000 people in nearly every US state. Canceling a contract will be political suicide. Now, let's go back to the Iraq War. Because if there's one company that truly embodies the phrase war profiteer, it's Halliburton. Through its subsidiary KBR, Kellogg Brown and Root, Halliburton made more than $39.5 billion from contracts during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And how they get those contracts? Through no-bid agreements, meaning no competition, no review, no oversight. And what did we get? $45 for a 12-pack of soda, fraudulent invoices for tens of millions, meals billed but never served, electrical work so shoddy it electrocuted US soldiers in their own showers. And here's the kicker. Dick Cheney, who served as George W. Bush vice president and helped push the invasion of Iraq, was Halliburton's CEO before he took office. He received a $36 million severance and retained stock options worth millions while in office. In other words, he pushed for a war that personally enriched him. And this is the real face of war in America. It's not soldiers raising a flag, it's not sacrifice and service, it's not even about defense. It's about revenue, dividends, stock buybacks. Every bomb drop is a business win, Every destroyed tank is a reorder. Every conflict is a new market. They don't need the war to end. They need it to sustain. Because for these companies, peace is a threat to the bottom line. So next, we'll talk about the boots on the ground that don't wear a uniform. Private military contractors, mercenaries, cowboys with guns and no oversight. From Blackwater to DynCorp. These are the warlords of the free market. So stick around.
Fascinating new study. We've talked a lot about how people profit a lot off of war, but sometimes we don't have the exact numbers. A brand new study from Brown University actually puts a number on that figure. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen, which is that Pentagon reliance on contractors hurt U.S. in 9/11 wars. Oh yeah, file that one under no curse word. So up to half of the $14 trillion spent by the Pentagon since 9/11 went to for-profit defense contractors, a study released found. It's the latest work to show that the reliance on private corporations for war zone duties used to be done by troops contributed to mission failure in Afghanistan. So there's two important things that are going on there. Number one is obviously there was a profit incentive. This is from the Brown University's Cost of War project. But number two is that we used to have native capacity within the armed forces to do all sorts of things.
So what happens when war becomes so profitable that we don't even bother sending soldiers anymore? We outsource it to contractors, to mercenaries, to private security firms that operate in the shadows, off the books, outside the law, and beyond accountability. So it's welcome to the era of privatized warfare, where the triggerman doesn't wear a uniform, and the battlefield reports get filtered through PR firms. And the worst part? You're still paying for it. So let's start with the name that changed everything. Blackwater, founded in 1997 by Eric Prince, a former Navy SEAL and the brother of Trump's former Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. Blackwater was built to be a private military training facility. But after 9/11, it became a war machine of its own. Between 2001 and 2010, Blackwater received over $1.6 billion in U.S. government contracts. And that money wasn't for training troops. It was for doing the dirty work. The job's too politically risky, too morally ambiguous, or too legally murky for the U.S. military to handle. They guarded diplomats, they trained foreign militaries, they protected oil executives, and they ran convoys through dangerous territory where soldiers would have needed congressional approval. But let's not sugarcoat it. They weren't just quote-unquote security. They were armed mercenaries. And their legacy? Blood. So let's go to September 16, 2007. Niser Square, Baghdad. A team of Blackwater contractors opened fire in a crowded intersection. They killed 17 Iraqi civilians, wounded 20 more, including a 9-year-old boy who was shot in the head as he sat in the backseat of his father's car. The contractors claimed they were under attack, but the FBI, eyewitnesses, and multiple investigations found no credible threat. One U.S. diplomat called it out flat out, and I quote, "It was a massacre." The incident sparked international outrage. The Iraqi government called for the company to be expelled, and yet the State Department renewed Blackwater's contract just months later. Why? Because Blackwater had become too big to fail, a private patriotic guard for the U.S. government. And they even said it. Eric Prince said it. We were the patriotic guard. So let that sink in. He compared his company to the elite bodyguards of the Roman Empire. The same guards who often murder emperors and sold the throne to the highest bidder. Eventually, 4 Blackwater contractors were convicted for the Niser Square massacre. But in 2020, Donald Trump pardoned them all. Shocking. And convicted war criminals set free because loyalty to profit trumps justice. And Blackwater wasn't some rogue exception. They were the blueprint for this. Other companies follow, like Dincor International. Between 2002 and 2011, Dincor received over $7.5 billion in contracts, mainly for police training and logistics in Iraq, Afghanistan, and beyond. What did we get for all that money? A 2009 State Department audit found Dincor couldn't explain where $1.2 billion went. They built police stations they were never used, trained illiterate recruits, and in some cases, their operations became hotbeds of corruption and abuse. And yet, they got more contracts. Because here's the business model. Chaos equals opportunity. Instability equals income. The worse it gets, the more they bill. This is disaster capitalism, militarized. Now let's talk the scale of it. At the peak of the Afghanistan war, there were around 70,000 US troops and over 100,000 private contractors. That's more contractors than soldiers. And they weren't even just washing laundry or flipping burgers. Many were carrying rifles. Many were engaging in combat. Many were operating with zero legal oversight. Under U.S. law, uniformed military are bound by the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ. They're also subject to the Geneva Convention. But private contractors? They operate in the legal gray zone. In a 2007 law known as the Military Extraterritorial Jurisdiction Act, attempted to close some of these loopholes. But prosecutions are rare, enforcement is patchy, and many cases just disappear. If a contractor commits a war crime, there's no court-martial, no military tribunal, and often no consequences. So why does this matter? Because when war is privatized, accountability disappears. And when violence becomes a service industry, you create an economy that needs conflicts to survive. Contractors don't build peace. They don't stabilize regions. They don't protect democracy. They protect pipelines, not people. They guard mineral rights, not schools. They serve the stockholders, not citizens. This is a war without a flag. No code of conduct, no nation to answer to, just contracts and cash. So with that, we're going to come up with the third segment. We head to the Capitol Hill. Because while Blackwater was unloading in Baghdad, somebody in Congress was buying stock in Raytheon. We're diving into the insider trading, backdoor deals, and how the war economy didn't just build the bombs. It built millionaires in office. So stick with us.
At least 19 members of Congress stand to personally profit off of the war in Ukraine as a result of their stock holdings in Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. That's according to Business Insider. Raytheon and Lockheed Martin are the manufacturers of the Javelin and Stinger missiles, which Western allies are currently sending to Ukraine. Among those investing in the defense contractors is Republican Representative John Rutherford of Florida, who purchased between $1,001 and $15,000 worth of Raytheon stock on February 24th, which is the day Russia invaded Ukraine. Rutherford sits on the House Appropriations Committee and the Subcommittee for Homeland Security.
Marjorie Taylor Greene bought between $1,000 and $15,000 worth of stock in Lockheed Martin on February 22nd. 2 days before Russia invaded Ukraine. On the 24th, she tweeted, quote, "War is big business to our leaders," to which Representative Ilhan Omar responded, quote, "Add this to the list of why members of Congress should never be allowed to trade stocks."
So let me ask you something. What if you could vote to send a country to war and then turn around and make money off the bombs that fall? Now, based on some of the comments I've read so far, you would do that in a heartbeat. For the rest of us, it sounds like a conflict of interest, right? Well, in Congress, it's just another Tuesday. Because while American troops are bleeding on foreign soil, elected officials in DC are buying stock in the very company supplying the weapons. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is public record. So let's rewind to February 24, 2022, the day Russia invaded Ukraine. That same week, as airstrikes began, as civilians fled their homes, multiple U.S. lawmakers made quiet, well-timed stock purchases. According to this disclosures reviewed by Business Insider and Sludge, members of Congress, both Republican and Democrat, increased their holdings in Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman either right before or immediately after the invasion. One of them, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. On the same day she tweeted, and I quote, "War is incredibly profitable and convenient." She bought defense stock. She didn't lie. She cashed in. And she's not alone. This kind of profiting isn't new. Because during the Iraq War, members of Congress on defense oversight committees were actively invested in companies like Halliburton, Boeing, and General Dynamics. A 2008 Washington Post investigation found, and I quote, "At least 47 members of Congress and their spouses held stock in companies that were awarded defense contracts during the height of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars." So let that sink in. The same people deciding where and when we send troops were making money off the tools of that war. They weren't just voting on war budgets. They were voting for their portfolios. You know what that's called anywhere else? Insider trading. So how do we let this happen? Well, we tried to fix it. In 2012, Congress passed the Stock Act, short for Stop Trading on Congressional Knowledge. It was supposed to ban insider trading among lawmakers, to require timely public disclosure of stock trades, to make members of Congress live under the same rules as the rest of us. But guess what? Less than a year later, Congress gutted the bill quietly at night by unanimous consent. They removed the requirement for real-time public disclosures online. They weakened enforcement. They killed oversight. Just like that, the Stock Act became a toothless. Today, members of Congress can sit in classified briefings about tensions in the South China Sea. They can walk out and buy stock in Lockheed Martin before the news breaks. And then that, perfectly legal. That's not governance, that's legalized grift. Let's talk numbers. Since 2020, over 100 members of Congress, including prominent leaders, have traded stock in companies directly impacted by legislation or government contracts they oversee. That includes Nancy Pelosi, whose husband invested heavily in tech stocks while she was negotiating antitrust legislation. Senator Tommy Tuberville, who traded in defense and energy stocks while on Armed Services Committee. And Representative Pat Fallon, who bought up defense shares as Ukraine funding packages moved through Congress. Even Senator Rand Paul, who loved to yell about deep state corruption, failed to disclose his wife's purchase of stock in Gilead Science, the company that developed I forget how much corrupt these people are. Remdesivir during the COVID crisis. They're all betting on bills they help write. And it's not just elected officials. It's their spouses, their staffers, and their donors. It's the revolving door between Capitol Hill and the Pentagon. In a 2022 New York Times investigation revealed that at least 672 retired Pentagon officials have gone on to work for military contractors. Some became lobbyists, some joined boards, some became consultants for companies they once regulated. And this comes from the New York Times article called Pentagon Retirees Cash In with Defense Contractors. And I quote, "Nearly all the top generals overseeing U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan later joined defense firms or advisory boards." So you tell me, how do you wage an honest war when everyone involved has a financial stake in keeping it going? And what do we get out of it? Us, the people. What do the American people get when war becomes just another investment opportunity. More conflict, more spending, more speeches about freedom and security, while families bury their children and our veterans sleep on the streets. Meanwhile, Lockheed Martin stock hits record highs. Raytheon celebrates a bullish quarter, and Congress smiles quietly because their portfolios are up. Like, this isn't leadership, guys. It's a racket. And in America, war is Wall Street's most reliable commodity. With all that, coming up next in the segment 4, we go deeper and darker. Because war doesn't just cost money, it costs lives, innocent ones. So in the next segment, we'll talk drone strikes, civilian deaths, and how the Pentagon puts a price tag on collateral damage, then buries the receipts. Because if war is profitable, accountability is just too expensive. So stick around.
The Islamic State group has largely been driven from the cities in Iraq and Syria that it controlled with fear and terror. A U.S. bombing campaign played a major role in the fight, but according to a report in the New York Times, thousands more civilians were killed in those bombing runs than the Pentagon initially admitted. I spoke earlier with one of the authors of that report, Azmat Khan, about how she and her colleagues conducted the investigation.
Well, we wanted to see how the coalition, the U.S.-led coalition's air campaign was playing out on the ground. And so we did a systematic sample in 3 different traditionally ISIS-held areas near Mosul, and we looked at every single airstrike in each of these areas. They were downtown Qayara, downtown Shora, and the Aden district of East Mosul. And what we found, or what we were trying to figure out, was which number of airstrikes, of the total number of airstrikes in those areas, had resulted in civilian deaths or casualties. And then from that to determine which ones of those were coalition airstrikes so that we could get a reliable sense of how effectively this campaign was going, because when you look at the coalition's own statements about this, they boast that this is the most precise air campaign in the history of warfare, and I really wanted to know if that was the case.
And what did you find?
We found that precision might not matter if the intelligence is wrong. And of the 103 airstrikes we looked at, there were 20 civilian casualty incidents of airstrikes. And in about half of those, there appeared to be no discernible target nearby, no ISIS target suggesting either poor or faulty intelligence. So if you don't have the right target in mind and you're conflating civilians with combatants, your precision may not matter.
There's a word the Pentagon uses when innocent people die during the U.S. military operations. Collateral. Collateral damage. Collateral casualties. Collateral consequences. A word that turns humans into incidents. That turns a wedding party into a line item. But let's be honest. Let's say what the Pentagon wants. These aren't accidents. They are acceptable losses in a system where profit, power, and plausible deniability outweigh accountability. So let's talk about drones. Since 2004, the US has carried out thousands of drone strikes across countries where we've never declared war on. Let's go. Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, Syria. So according to the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, U.S. drone strikes have killed between 900 and 2,200 civilians, including as many as 400 children. And let's be clear, that's a conservative estimate. Why? Because the U.S. government has routinely underreported civilian deaths, labeled civilians as combatants, and in many cases refused to disclose fatality numbers at all. These strikes are not scrutinized, they're sanitized, wrapped in the language of precision and security, but carried out with limited intelligence and minimal oversight. Let's revisit a moment that broke this illusion. August 29, 2021, Kabul, Afghanistan. After a suicide bombing at the airport killed 13 U.S. service members, the Pentagon launched what is called a righteous strike against an alleged ISIS target. They claimed they had prevented another attack, but investigative reporting by the New York Times proved otherwise. The man targeted Samari Ahmadi, an aid worker for a U.S.-based charity. He was delivering water to his family. The drone strike killed 10 civilians, including 7 children, some as young as 2 years old. There were no explosives in the car, no ISIS operatives, just a father and his kids. And the Pentagon's response? I quote, this is from General Kenneth McKenzie, "A tragic mistake. No persecutions, no fires, no consequences." And this isn't new. During the Obama administration, drone strikes surged. Between 2009 and 2017, the U.S. conducted 563 drone strikes compared to 57 under Bush. And in 2016, a leaked cache of documents known as the Drone Papers, published by The Intercept, exposed a terrifying detail. And I quote, "During a 5-month period in Afghanistan, nearly 90% of those killed in drone strikes were not the intended targets." That is not precision. That's a systematic error rebranded as success. And under Trump, he revoked Obama-era transparency rules that require reporting civilian casualties, making drone strikes more secretive than ever. The result? We don't know how many people were killed, and that's by design. So here's how the math works. Because yes, there is math. According to the Pentagon's old rules, any male of military age is in a drone strike zone is automatically classified as an enemy combatant unless proven otherwise. So if a teenager is caught in the blast, he's counted as a terrorist unless his family survives long enough to prove he wasn't. That's not justice, that's a fraud by algorithm. And when civilians do survive, when families speak out, they sometimes offer salacious payments, a one-time condolence payout from the U.S. government. The average $2,500 to $10,000. Sometimes more, often nothing at all. And that's the price of a funeral. Not justice, not acknowledgement, just a quiet payoff to buy silence. And it's not just the military, it's the contractors too. DenCorp, for example, was linked to multiple scandals, from human trafficking and sexual abuse in Bosnia, the corruption in Afghanistan and Iraq. Despite these accusations, DenCorp continued to receive billions in U.S. contracts. Not one executive jail, not one contract cancel, because in this system, accountability isn't failure. It's a financial liability. Now let's zoom out. Since 9/11, U.S. wars have killed more than 430,000 civilians worldwide. And what do we have to show for it? No declaration of victory, no sustainable peace, just more military budgets and more drone strikes. And the people responsible, they're not on the battlefield, they're in the boardrooms, in briefings, on earning calls. Because in modern war, civilian casualties aren't a tragedy, they're a line item. And if the truth gets too messy, it gets classified. So here's what I need you to remember. This isn't just about the bombs and drones. This is about how war is normalized, how human life is devalued, and how death gets monetized until the public stops asking questions. We're not just at war with enemies. We're at war with the truth. So with that, in our final segment, we look at the other side of that war economy. The ones who survive it. What happens to the soldiers we send into battle? When the cameras are off, the medals are handed out, and the system just walks away. We'll talk about the veterans, mental health, homelessness, and the unbearable hypocrisy of the government that praises the troops in public, but discards them in private. Stick around, because this one's personal. Before I move on to the next segment, I need to pause for a second, and I need you to hear something. Coming up, you're going to listen to a longer stretch of audio more longer than usual. You're going to hear headlines, speeches, and news clips about veterans being ignored, denied, and left behind by the very politicians, especially on the Republican side, who claim to support the troops. And this isn't filler. And this is the point. Because this problem, this betrayal, it didn't start last year. It didn't start with Trump. And it damn sure won't end with a parade. This has been going on for decades, across wars, across generations. And over again is the same people waving flags on campaign ads, screaming about freedom, making promises with their hands on Bibles, who turn around and cut funding, deny claims, they block care, and leave veterans behind while they cash checks from defense contractors and send more of us off to fight. It's not a bug in the system. It is the system. So yeah, this next part might be long, but it's long on purpose. Because this is the evidence. Because if you're not angry by the time it ends, you're not listening.
At my most recent town hall, one veteran who has sought mental health care at the VA since 1970 shared his concerns about the future of his care in the midst of these impending cuts. Another constituent of mine reached out via email and shared that, quote, veterans that use the Center for Mental Health Issues are having anxiety attacks over the issues at the VA. This is the real cost of the administration's decisions. And instead of standing up for veterans, my Republican colleagues have written a bill that rubber stamps the administration's illegal and cruel acts. Our veterans deserve better. They deserve a Congress that will honor their service, not just with words, but with action.
We always have money for war. We never have money for the war fighter. And it's unacceptable. We support the troops until the troops need support. And then we bury it. So we're going to go to Congress and we're going to try and put every congressperson, senator, and representative on record if they're okay with this. And they're all going to say the same thing. We don't have the science. So I would challenge each one of these congresspeople to go back to their district and say, we're going to dig a 10-acre pit, and we're going to take all the garbage, hazardous materials, and everything else from this town, and we're going to pour jet fuel on it, and we're going to light it in the center of the town. And when your constituents come to you and say, what's with this thick, black, acrid smoke, just say, I think it's fine. We don't have the science, particularly. They're holding these veterans to a bar that nobody can meet. We know smoking causes lung cancer. But if you have lung cancer, you can't actually prove that it was the smoke. And that's the bar that they're holding these veterans to. Please do not allow congresspeople to duck this issue. We have the money. It's there.
This is just disgusting. So it seemed that the Clay Hunt Suicide Prevention Act was about to get passed as of like Friday of last week. Maybe it was Saturday. It is named after a Marine vet who took his own life in 2011. It would create a new peer support programs for troubled vets. It would mandate new online mental health resources. It would repay student loans for psychiatrists willing to work at the VA facilities. It would look into the existing suicide prevention programs they have. It would have been, you've got, the numbers are staggering on how many vets are killing themselves. It was basically blocked. Not basically, it was blocked. It's not going to happen now. It may have to be re-brought up, and maybe it could happen 6 months, a year down the line. When Tom Coburn, who is retiring, Republican from Oklahoma, stopped it because he was concerned that it might be redundant and too expensive. Are you ready for how much it's costing? Get me the figure of what we spent on one of the Benghazi committee hearings. $30 million? On one of those projects. This measure cost $22 million over 5 years. You're talking $4.5 million some odd, a little less, a year to help prevent suicides of vets. Now, you recall that when it comes to torturing people and paying for the torture facilities, $81 million, if it saves one American life, we'll spend $81 million on torturing a half a dozen or 100 guys. But to spend $4.5 million a year to help deal with all of the vets who are suffering after these extended wars that we've been engaged in, these wars of choice. How much is the Benghazi hearings?
The House... Must be nice, right? To be not only fully funded all the time, but to have an embarrassment of riches that you don't even know what to do with. That is true of the military and only of the military. You would think that veterans, too, would have the same problem that the military does, right? That members of Congress would be showering veterans issues with funding, given the way members of Congress are showboating right now about how much they care about veterans and how outraged they are about veterans having long waits to get health care. Veterans are waiting too long for health care. But when given the chance to vote for an expansion in the care that veterans are waiting too long for, Congress has not treated veterans the way they treat the Defense Department. No, veterans are treated more like food stamps or education or any other kind of funding that Republicans won't pass in the House and that they will filibuster in the Senate because they don't want to pay for it. Look, Senate Republicans block veterans' health bill on budget worry. This bill called for 27 new medical facilities to help a healthcare system that is strained by veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Republicans raised budget concerns, forcing another key procedural vote that ended up killing the bill.
There are problems with this bill. It is an extensive piece of legislation. It has many good elements in it. It also has a cost issue at a time when our nation owes close to $18 trillion. And that was the reason why so many on my side of the aisle objected to it. And that's why I would object to the motion made here today by the senator from Vermont.
I think the decision we've got here as we debate this legislation is whether we're going to commit to a promise that's bigger than what our kids can fulfill, that costs more than our kids can afford.
I certainly understand where Senator Burr is coming from, that we want to, one, pay for whatever we do because we're $17 trillion in debt.
Despite being terribly in debt, we can afford anything when it comes to creating veterans, sending them to war and funding the military. But when soldiers come home hurt from those wars, oh, that's where it's too expensive. Costs too much to fund VA health care. We can't possibly spend the money to alleviate the strain on the overburdened system with all those vets needing taken care of, so we won't fund it. Have you looked at the debt?
You're lying. I'm a veteran. You don't give a f*** about me.
So, this isn't just policy, it's personal. Because every time I speak out about war, the military, or the system that profits of conflict, I get both support and backlash. I have people question my loyalty, my identity, even my right to speak. Let me set the record straight. I am a U.S. citizen. I am a U.S. Marine. I've worn the uniform, I've deployed, I've trained, I have followed all orders, and I've served alongside people who truly believed they were fighting for something bigger than themselves. But here's the real question, and they tend to ignore. What happens when the fighting ends? For too many, the answer is silence. We call our veterans heroes on Veterans Day, and we celebrate also the ones who perish on Memorial Day. But by the time the fireworks stop, we're no longer anywhere. We're invincible. We're invisible to them, to everybody else. And according to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, 32,882 veterans were experiencing homelessness in 2024. That's not a number, because that's a national failure. And it doesn't stop there. The Department of Veterans Affairs reported 6,407 veteran suicides in 2022, which breaks down to an average of 17.6 veterans dying by suicide per day. That number has increased drastically. But if you include like self-injury mortality, like overdose, indirect death linked to trauma, that number may be as high as 44 veterans per day. And these are not just statistics. They are the policy failures about what we fund, what we prioritize, and what we ignore. The VA system, the one institution meant to care for veterans, is constantly under strain. Clinics are always understaffed, claims are delayed, mental health appointments are hard to get, and files get lost, people fall through the cracks. Meanwhile, we spend $1.7 trillion on the F-35 fighter jet program, the most expensive weapons system in the human history. But we can't fund enough beds for veterans in crisis. And then there are the burn pits. There are the giant open air fires used to dispose of everything from medical waste to jet fuel right on U.S. military bases. Thousands of veterans came home with cancers, lung damage, and neurological problems. And for years, the government denied any link. Only until 2022, after years of advocacy and mounting funerals, the Congress finally passed the PACT Act, expanding benefits to cover toxic exposure. And this is from President Biden in 2022. And I quote, "Veterans are the first to defend us and should be the last to be forgotten." Like true words, but saying them is not the same as funding the care. And let's talk about what that care looks like and how often it gets blocked. In 2014, Senator Bernie Sanders introduced a sweeping VA modernization bill. And this included 27 new facilities, expanded mental health services, streamlined claims, and $21 billion over 10 years. It was blocked by Senate Republicans, led by Mitch McConnell, who said it was too expensive. Meanwhile, the Pentagon budget sailed through with little resistance. New contracts, new weapons, no questions asked. Now let's fast forward to 2023, and the House Republicans proposed slashing VA funding by $15 billion, targeting homelessness programs, mental health services, and administrative staff. Yet again, defense spending remained untouched. They always find money for war. But when it comes to peace, suddenly there's a deficit. We have to be financially responsible. And in early 2025, the VA proposed cutting up to 83,000 jobs, from around 15% of its entire workforce. Yes, some of those cuts were paused, but only after public outcry. The original plan would have gutted the suicide prevention teams, homeless veterans outreach, toxic exposure, and cancer care clinics, rural health services. Like, this isn't streamlining. This is erasure, one staff reduction at a time. This is through Doge and President Trump. And let me be clear, this is not about blaming troops. This is about holding the system accountable. The one that promised service then disappears after discharge. Veterans deserve stable housing through programs like HUD, VASH, and the Grant and Per Diem Initiative. We deserve mental health care access, including the Veteran Crisis Line, available 24/7 by calling 998 and press 1. They want to cut that. And that, for me, that has saved me. Then we go to timely care for burn pit victims and toxic exposure and continue implementation of the PACT Act in any timely manner. Everything needs to be covered. And most importantly, we deserve to be treated as more than a photo fucking op. And so this was a shorter segment, and this is what happens to the veterans afterwards. We get forgotten. We gotta do a quick recap after this. Please stick around. Let's bring this home. We just spent this episode walking through America's real war economy. Not the one sold to us in Super Bowl ads and Veterans Day parades, but the one that actually exists, where conflict isn't an unfortunate reality. It's a business model, where every war starts not with a flag, but with a contract. And we exposed the corporations, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Boeing, companies that sell weapons like Silicon Valley sells smartphones. Each wore a product rollout. Each airstrike, a stuck bump. And we cover Blackwater, mercenaries who operated with no rules. They kill civilians in broad daylight and still walk free after Trump pardoned them. And we broke down how Congress plays the market. Lawmakers literally buying defense stocks days before approving military action. They bet on war, then vote to make it happen, using your tax dollars and someone else's child as collateral. And we talked about drone strikes, where children, aid workers, wedding guests are vaporized, and the Pentagon calls this a collateral damage. Where accountability gets redacted, and the truth gets buried beneath military jargon and classified memos. And we talked about the veterans, about how the very people who served this country, who wear the uniform, who survive the battlefield, are discarded the moment they become politically inconvenient. This is a system that simply fails people. It's a system that was built to fail anyone not profiting from it. Now, here's where I'm going to step out for a script and speak out to you directly. Because I've seen the comments. I've gotten the DMs. People saying I'm not American enough, that I don't get to talk about war or patriotism. Let me be clear. I am a U.S. Marine veteran. And I've worn the uniform. I've deployed. I've been injured and I've bled and I've done all this stuff. And I carry brothers who didn't come home. And yet, the moment I speak out against the machine, the system that uses up people like me and throws us away, I become the enemy. That says more about you than it does about me. You want to talk patriotism? Then let's talk about where you were when this country fell to the people who served it. And I'm going to call out my representatives of this state. Where were you when James Lankford voted against the PACT Act, blocking benefits for vets exposed to burn pits? James Lankford, go fuck yourself. Where were you when Tom Cole tried to slash VA programs while defending defense contractors? Tom Cole, go fuck yourself. And where were you when Kevin Hearn, a man who claims to love this country, protected corporations but ignored the very people who fought for it? Kevin Hearn, go fuck yourself too. And here's the truth. Veterans don't need your thank yous. We don't need your hashtags. We don't need another empty support our troops bumper sticker. We need housing. We need mental health care. We need jobs that pay, clinics that answer, policies that deliver. We need this country to invest in healing people, not building more fucking bombs. And that starts with calling out the people standing in the way. These aren't abstract problems. They are names, they are votes, they are decisions made behind microphones and sealed doors. So let's be real. If you say you care about service members, if you post about the troops, salute the flag, and wear a pin, then prove it. Because if you can send working class kids off to fight and die in a desert for oil, contracts, and geopolitical theater, then you better be damn sure they have a place to live, a doctor to see, and a country worth coming back to. And if that truth offends you, Good. Maybe that means you're finally hearing it. Here's your call to action. Call the representatives. Demand they fully fund the VA. Demand to end to privatizing care. Demand that defense budgets don't grow while the VA clinics shrink. Support real veteran organizations, not just photo ops. Groups like IAVA, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, Minority Veterans of America, Burn Pits 360, Veteran Crisis Line. And like, name their names. Tag your reps. Call them out. Show your neighbors what supporting the troops actually requires. Question every war. Ask who profits. Ask who dies. Ask who sold it to you. Because right now, you're noticing how right now Fox News and OAN and all these right-wing politicians are selling Iran right now, right? Really reminiscent of Iraq. Exactly the same playbook as Iraq. And people are buying it. We're about to go into a war again for a lie, and we're going to see more caskets and more homeless veterans because of a liar or in billionaires in Congress who are making money out of the working class people and the future children of this country. Also, talk to your kids. Talk to your classroom. Talk to your union. Talk to your church, because silence is complicity, and complicity is how this system survives. And to all these trolls, I'm gonna keep saying it. Like, if to every troll, I'm just gonna say, you got something to say? Save it, because I'm not going anywhere. And I'm gonna keep saying to you, I served this country. I've done more than you have done in your lifetime. And just because I'm holding this country accountable for every promise it broke, because if you can't send the working class kids to war, then you damn well better be ready to take care of them when they come home. If that offends you, good. That means you're finally paying attention, or because it hurts your feelings, you fucking pieces of shit. Again, this has been the problem with, this has been the deep dive. Let's keep this going, guys, because veterans are dying left and right, and we're being homelessness. We've seen homelessness of veterans, and we were signed up for a promise, and we're coming back to a country that doesn't give a crap about us. I'll see you next time.